Hello everyone, welcome to Process Management, Why So Few Companies Get It Right. It's nice to be back doing webinars after a long hiatus as I was working on my next book, which I'm co-authoring with Mike Osterling, and will be out in the fall on value stream mapping in office service and knowledge work environments. So before we get started, if we could do a quick sound check and make sure that everything's working with technology here, if you could please raise your hand and let me know that you can hear me loud and clear, please. Excellent. All right, thank you. Well, I want to welcome everyone, and we have actually some new countries represented today that have never been on the webinar. I'd like to have a special welcome to, and that's Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. We also have folks from Australia. Good morning. It's very early there. Canada, Spain, Great Britain, India, New Zealand, Philippines, and of course all across the United States. So thank you everyone for joining. I have to say, this is probably my most passionate topic. I've got a lot of topics that I've been focused on lately, but this is one of the ones that's really kind of getting to me. So this will probably be a little more provocative email, and I may be a little harder on the improvement community than I sometimes am, and harder on companies than I sometimes am, because frankly, we just aren't doing very well. You know, we've been at improvement and process design and lean and Six Sigma and TQM and CQI for decades now. And if you consider, Deming being the first, huge personality to bring improvement to the forefront, and then from that point forward, we've been at this for way too many decades. We should be seeing a lot more progress than we are. So, to me, if you want to have an outstanding organization, if you want to achieve operational excellence, we just have to get more serious about process management. And if we don't get serious about process management, well, those of you who've read my book, I'm a person that looks to chaos a lot and looks at measuring chaos in organizations and believes very much that organizations aren't achieving their goals and aren't performing to the levels they want because they have too much chaos. And there's no way, absolutely no way, to get rid of chaos if you don't get this process management thing nailed. So let's hop to it and see what it's going to take. For those of you that are new for the webinars, welcome, welcome. And if you may not know me, just a little about my background. I started out in healthcare and even before that in science and did some medical research for a while, and then moved into business management within the healthcare industry. I've had my consulting firm for 20 years. We're celebrating our 20th year this year. And we do lead transformations, full-blown transformations that are many years long, sometimes 2 to 3 years, client engagements. And we also facilitate very specific improvement activities. And then we also do a fair amount of leadership and workforce development. So any of those things. I also teach at University of California, San Diego, and I'm actually teaching a 5-hour course this afternoon, which is why we're doing the webinar an hour early today. 3 books out and 1 about to come out, and I welcome you to take a look at any of those. Today we'll actually be talking a little bit about metrics-based process mapping, not a whole lot, but a little bit, and a little bit about value stream mapping, and it's all, of course, very closely tied to the outstanding organization and the principles I talk about, what makes an organization truly outstanding. So let's hop to it. I gave a survey when you were registering for the webinar that wasn't a required survey, but many of you did respond, so thank you for that. And I was just trying to get a sense of who you are and how mature your organizations are. Thought I would share with the whole group what where you fit in with the folks that are on the webinar today. So what concerns me about this question, the percentage of processes in your organization that are documented, is it, over 50% of you are saying that 50% or fewer of your processes are even documented. There's just this tribal knowledge, this native, way that people go about doing work that makes it impossible to measure improvement and, frankly, impossible to perform well when you don't have a standard approach to how people should work. So this is something that concerns me greatly. And then of those that are documented, the percentage of them that are current, so, I guess I would be a little provocative and say, what's the point of documenting if they're not kept up to date? Also, pretty alarming numbers of the percentage that are current, that are percentage of processes that are documented that are even current. So this is definitely something that we have to be taking a very, very close look at. Now this one is even more disturbing to me. So a percentage of processes with 2 to 5 clearly defined key performance indicators. That's what KPI is, key performance indicators. So key performance indicators are measurements that you would be taking on a very regular basis to say whether your process is performing as it should or not. And so this, not operating with KPIs is akin to a bicyclist who's, training for a race, having no idea what his or her time needs to be in order to, get in the top 10% of the people finishing, let alone to win. This would be like, a basketball team having no idea what their competition is doing and how they need to perform in order to beat their competition. This is like operating completely in the dark and having no idea whether you're performing well or not, other than the amount of fires that are erupting and the amount of complaints you're getting from customers, whether internal or external. So this is a significant problem. Now, this is interesting. So again, like I said, why document if it's not kept current? Why have key performance indicators if they're not measured? So this is the most disturbing, statistic-wise, of all of the responses, where 44% of you said that 0 to 10% of your processes are measured regularly, whether they have KPIs or not. So, again, if you've got all these processes that we're just praying work, the thing about chaos that's important, and many of you have read my book, that entropy, or the opposite of calm and a standard regular approach, entropy is chaos. You cannot expect chaos to not occur if you're not managing it. So this is something that, it's no wonder organizations have so much chaos when we've got these high amounts of processes that are just kind of going on and no one is measuring them. Now, when it comes to measurement, of course, someone's got to measure. And so one of the huge problems in organizations, which I'll talk about in detail today, is that there's no clearly identified process owner. And by process owner, I mean someone who's watching the process on a very regular basis, and they're looking to see, is it performing well or not? And if not, why not? And what are we going to do about it? And those kinds of things. So when you've got, again, 40% of you saying that 0 to 10% of your processes internally even have an owner looking at them, then, of course, it's no wonder why we're having difficulty, right? So then the last thing is, this is where there's a little bit of good news, is that the process owners that those of you do have for those processes that have ownership, they're inching toward being at the right level. So it used to be when I asked the question, who's the process owner, and they would, oftentimes clients would name someone, and then I'd say, well, what level in the organization is that person? And they'd answer director or vice president. And what they were getting confused about, and what you may get confused about a little bit, is that process ownership doesn't mean the person who has ultimate accountability for a department or a division operating well. It's someone who has the authority and the responsibility for making sure that a process is performing well. So the closer to the work that person is, the more effective they're going to be, for a couple reasons. One, they're closer to the work, so it's easier to see what's really going on, but also they tend to have fewer competing interests that keep them from taking a look at a process at a tactical level and seeing if it's really performing well. When you get to the director level and above, having been there, you just have way bigger fish to fry, and the issues are far broader and bigger that you're dealing with. So having any bandwidth to be able to really look at a process at the level you need to make sure it's performing as it should and continuously improve it if it's not, or even if it is, just to raise the bar, that you're just not going to have the time and attention that you need in order to do that. So make sure when you start getting toward this process ownership behavior you're building into your organization and the actual accountability, that you keep people pretty close to the work. Now, what I've done a lot of thinking on, how do I simplify this issue? Because, I like Deming, although I don't equate myself at all in his camp, but like him, I've been preaching this for a long time. He preached it longer than I did, but I've been at this a long time. And something's not happening. You can talk and talk and talk, and until people take action, then, I don't consider myself a success at all. And so one of the things that I've been debating about is, maybe the message is too complicated. Maybe people aren't understanding what's really, the simple things that they could do that would help them and help reduce chaos. And oh, by the way, have people that are engaged in an organization have a much better quality of life when they're at work, because we don't have significant chaos and we are able to quickly improve processes when they need it. So I drilled it down to 3 major points with a couple of sub-points under number 2, and that is, first, you've got to have clearly defined and documented processes. Second, you have to have 2 to 5 relevant key performance indicators for every single process. If you don't have a measurement foundation, then how will you know if you're performing well? If we had no speedometers in our cars, we would not know how fast we're driving. You could take a guess, but you may be way off. I just got a brand new car, and I can't believe how much faster and my other car was 11 years old. I can't believe how much faster I can go in that new car and not know I'm going that fast because it feels so smooth compared to my 11-year-old car. So you have to have, a measurement tool in order to be able to see if you're improving or not and how you're performing. And then finally, sole ownership and oversight. So let's take them one at a time and look at what you can do to improve life at your organization, improve the way your organization performs, which ultimately improves financials, market share, the amount of engagement across the workforce, the whole enchilada. So first, defined and documented processes. Now, there is no cookie-cutter world out there. Every single organization is different. Every industry is different. Every process is different. Every value stream is different. So you have to find the best way to define and document your specific processes. I'm going to give you some ideas, but you have to tailor this to your environment. So first of all, if you take a look at the granularity of work, a lot of people say, well, at what level should we be documenting the process? Well, there's 2 ways to look at it. One is a macro perspective, starting with a value stream map, is a great way to get very, very clear on how work flows through the system at a macro level. And it's important to start at that macro level so that you can prioritize where you really need to do improvement and where you need to document and at what level you need to document, rather than just jumping into the weeds and documenting everything, which is what I see organizations do. Sometimes you don't have to document every single little, gnat and hair that is involved in a process. So it's important to step back and take that macro view. I'm a big believer in value stream maps, as you'll see in the book when it comes out. Mike and I are both for getting that macro level view and getting alignment across the organization. Then when you get down into processes and the very specific tasks that are done, the teeny tiny little, enter in this field, hit, enter, and enter here, enter, send to Joe, Joe reviews, at that very, very micro level, then process maps are handy for that. So when I say document processes, it really depends on the process and the environment on how you should document. So even though you can't read this, very, very well because it's a very complicated value stream map, this is, for those of you who are new to this is an example of a value stream map for a true value stream, and it goes all the way to receipt of cash, which is a newer approach to value streams. So when you look at the actual value stream, stops midway here. So this is a repair value stream, and it's all about how the customer requests the need for a repair and then how the repair occurs. So this first part here is the actual delivery of value. And then this back end is all of the administrative steps the value stream has in order to actually receive payment for doing that work. And this particular organization, one of the problems they were having was it was just taking way too long to get paid for their work. So they were starting to have a cash crunch. And so it depends on what problem you're solving on how you decide what goes into your value stream map. But this is really a very simple way, even though it looks a little complicated to the eye, given what really happens in the real world at this organization for a customer to request a very expensive repair, for techs to be assigned, for techs to go out and do the repair and order parts, and all the labor and timekeeping, and then all the billing that goes along with it. This is a simple way to look at a very complex process. So documenting the process at this level enables people at a high level in the organization to see the strategy of how they do work, so they can make strategic decisions on how work should be altered in the future. You may or may not be able to just stop at that level. You may need to go down to a process level. And I would say that of all the value streams and processes I've met in my life, which are hundreds, I'd say a good 90% need to be drilled down. At least part of the value stream needs to be drilled down to the process level. And Mike and I are the co-authors of Metrics-Based Process Mapping. That came out last year, late last year. The new version, the book version. It has a CD in it with an Excel tool that helps you have an electronic means to archive standard work, and it also is an improvement tool. So, however you decide to document your processes, the one thing that this does is it has the steps at a micro level as well as the measurements, so that you've got two things in one document. So swim lanes are very helpful, especially when you get outside of manufacturing and you've got a lot of cross-functional interplay back and forth as work is flowing through a value stream. This process level map with swim lanes can be very helpful. The other thing it can be helpful for documenting the process, but not necessarily for improving the process, are the old-fashioned process flowcharts, which used to be the only thing we really had until we learned, all about metrics through primarily Toyota and the lean movement. So you can have process flowcharts that have decision trees that are very helpful, so that people know which path to take depending on the yes/no answers to a series of questions. Very, very helpful for training new hires. Very helpful for people to keep track of. Maybe, for example, maybe no's are only a 5% of the time, occurrence, and so maybe a person that's coming upon a no answer has to consult a flowchart to say, okay, now what do I do? So that's very helpful. And then you can even do a combined swim lane style process documentation with decision trees. Now, the thing that you can't do with something like this very easily is have metrics along with it. So that's the thing when you do a map like this, you end up getting rid of the decision trees and taking a very specific set of conditions and a very specific path in order to get a timeline that works, and you have metrics then to measure each step in the process. So either way, they both have their place, but the flowcharts are good for information, not necessarily for measurement and process management. Now, another thing that some of you on the line may be familiar with who are from manufacturing is the standard work combination sheet, which was a bit of the impetus from Mike and I to develop the metrics-based process mapping tool. We knew about this sheet. I think Toyota's the one that has made it a little more popular than anyone, but it's a breakdown of an operation and how many seconds or minutes an operator is doing each specific task, typically time to tack time, which is the pacing based on customer demand and the time available to do the work. This will allow someone to see how many seconds or minutes, could be days, they need to take on each task in order to meet tack time, so that you don't get queuing and bottlenecks in the work. So if you're in manufacturing, you can Google this. Actually, I got this from Google Images, just so you know, but I happen to know Jeff Hayjack very well, who is at www.velaction.com, and he has tons of great templates and things that you can use. I'm not sure if he charges for them or if they're free, but this is one of his templates that was one of the first things I saw on Google Images when I Googled standard work combination sheet. So this is a legitimate way to document a process. Okay, so you've got lots of options now on how you can document a process. Now let's move on to the KPIs, and this is again another one where I really can't offer you a cookie cutter because it's so highly dependent on what kind of process you are working with and what the issues are around that process. I'm a believer that when you assign 2 to 5 key performance indicators, they are not set in concrete. they should be dynamic based on how the process is performing. So for example, if you have a process that, let's just say that there's a high amount of errors being made, and so there's a round of improvement and you've implemented some error-proofed standard work and maybe done some additional training, maybe actually physically reconstructed a work environment, whatever you've done to reduce the errors, when you're going through the KPI process, it may be that once you get stability in that and the errors are now reduced and they're staying reduced, maybe you drop that KPI off and then you bring in another one to look at another aspect of process performance. So you don't have to keep these KPIs fixed for years and years on end. They need to be relevant for monitoring the process and making sure the process is performing as it should. So what you'll see here are there are three sub-areas. They need to be visually displayed, so just having them in a computer is not cool. That's not going to get you what you need in order to properly manage the process. You can document them internally and have them in a computer, but that shouldn't be the sole means of these KPIs being available to people. They need to be consistently measured. So KPIs, I would say for a high volume processes, you might need to be measuring every single day. In fact, really high volume, you may need to be measuring every single hour. It really just depends. Very low volume processes like annual budgeting, of course, you'd only be measuring that once a year when the annual budget is being done. So it really depends on the frequency of the process, on how consistently you measure it. The other thing is consistent improvement, and I'll go through that when I get to the process ownership a little more, but one of the things that I see happening is, and this is just something that just drives me nuts, to be frank. It drives me nuts to see organizations go through a round of improvement on a process and be highly successful with that round of improvement. So yay, that's great. But then it's never looked at until it starts getting into its entropy state. Chaos starts happening, fires start erupting, customers start complaining, and then now we've got a fire and we've got to improve the process again. If we were just constantly measuring, monitoring, managing, and improving throughout the life of the process, then we wouldn't have the fires. And that's the thing we've got to do, is stop having fires. There's no reason to have fires. A well-designed operation has very few fires. I've run them. I've designed them. I've managed them. You don't have to have fires. So this is what, I'm just trying to throw out there what you have to do to not have fires. All right. So these relevant KPIs, there's two different buckets of KPIs that I would consider, I would encourage you to look at. The first are the very, very nitty-gritty process level metrics that we're using to look at the speed at which work is being done and the effectiveness or the quality aspect of how work is being done. So I didn't want to put in all the details around exactly how lead time is calculated and process time and percent complete and accurate, because I've got so many webinars in the past, and I will in the future as well, that go into these. But if you're new to this kind of thinking and you want to learn more about it, all of my books define all three of these metrics, because I'm just that happy about these metrics, and they're really important. All of my webinars, if you look at either my website and look under the Learn tab, or if you go to Vimeo or YouTube, they're also now on SlideShare. Now that SlideShare is accepting video, they're everywhere. If you look at any of the mapping webinars, you can be sure that I'll go through the details of this. And if you look at any of the process management ones, Kaizen events included. So value stream mapping, metrics-based process mapping, Kaizen events. I think A3, all my A3 webinars include it. So there's lots of places where you can learn about these three metrics. But they're key. Now, it may be, I have based on relevance here, because it may be, for example, that you're really only focused on lead time reductions or the throughput time, turnaround time, other words that mean lead time. And it may be that you only have an error issue, that you're trying to reduce the errors that are being made, so you're only looking at percent complete and accurate. But the point is that you need to be looking at least one of these, if not all three, to see how a process is truly performing. Now, in addition to those, you really need to be also looking at other things. And so the other things depend on either a problem that you're solving or some sort of a customer expectation Or perhaps it's a new bar that you're raising the bar and you want to perform to a different level than perhaps you have. So these are examples of these other KPIs for a really wide variety of processes. So for example, if cash is a problem, it might be that one of your KPIs would be the percent of billed charges that the organization receives payment for within 30 days of that date of service. If you're a call center, it could be the amount of time people are on hold, which is a common KPI for call centers. If you're in healthcare, it could be the number of infections that patients get after they've come into the hospital, nosocomial infections. If you're in engineering or architectural or something like this, it might be the percentage of difference between your estimated and actual costs that you're taking a look at. Maybe you're plus or minus 25% and you want to get it to plus or minus 10%. So you're able to tighten that variation around your estimates to get better and better from a budgeting perspective. And then it might be either the number of errors or the percentage of work that have errors, if it's something like that. And this list goes on and on and on. I mean, this is just 5 examples of other KPIs. So again, you have to be very critical in your thinking and think through what really matters to the customer and what matters organizationally that needs to be measured. No more than 5. If you get more than 5, then you're going to be spending way too much time measuring. So you have to be very, very judicious in picking your maximum of 5 KPIs. And just one more note about that. You don't have to have 5. You don't even have to have 4. I would say you need to have at least 2 because you want to look at a process and how it's performing from at least 2 different perspectives. But, so I think 1 is a little too few. But 2 to 5 is the target. You pick based on what you're trying to accomplish. Now, an example, remember that visual display was one of the things underneath the need to have these 2 to 5 KPIs. So visual display can have so many different forms depending on what the data is. This happens to be an example of a client that had an error problem in correspondence going out to members. And so they happened to decide they wanted to look at this purple line as being, how they're being compared against their compadres in their industry, and then the gray being, what the best people in their industry were achieving, and then the blue being what their scores were. So they had a couple different targets that they were trying to achieve. One being getting up to the median, and then the other one being getting up to being the highest themselves. And they, in fact, have. In fact, you see that this is fiscal year 2010. I just talked with the senior VP who brought me in for this project, and sure enough, they have been for over 12 months now the highest in their industry. So they've done a phenomenal job, and I got to tell you, the way they did that, and I believe the most important element that has led them down that path of success has been a process owner. Like most of my clients, they definitely rejected it at first and said, no, that's not how we operate. And I pleaded and cajoled and begged them to consider this and, told stories about why process ownership works and all that stuff. And eventually they said, okay, fine, let's try it. We'll do an experiment and we'll just try it for a short amount of time. Great. So they put a process owner in place, and lo and behold, the proof's in the pudding. The results have been just phenomenal, and so this, I don't have their current chart, but basically the blue line is above the gray line, or the gray line is actually now the blue line because it's theirs. So process ownership matters. If you want to perform well, you've got to have one. Okay, so next, this is another way you could do a simple, arrow up, arrow down. Are we above where we should be? Are we below where we should be? This could be, something where, and I would argue that there's probably a few too many metrics here, but they did break it into different areas. So it was, production itself, and then customer service, and then quality. So it may not be overwhelming for a large value stream, but at a process level, you'd want to have no more than 5. So this is a way that you can have a signage, right in all the work areas that are relevant. And I recommend that people have little huddles around the metrics when they're posted and talk about, Okay, so what are we going to do? What's the corrective action? How do we get it up to the next level? And those kinds of things. That's why visual metrics really matter. Most of you have probably heard about that whole, I'm blanking on what it's called, the Hawthorne effect, where just because you're measuring, improvement will almost always occur just because you're measuring. So if you keep this very visible and have people, aware that these are the kinds of process measurements that are being measured, then you're much more likely to get people able to perform at the levels you want them to. The one thing I would just throw out there, if you're going to have visual metrics, you need to be very careful about productivity metrics. People behave very much based on how they're being measured. So if you're looking to get, number of calls up per person, number of widgets produced per person up, you may be actually introducing worse problems into the process. So you need to be very careful that you're asking for the right behavior and not behavior that you don't want. Now this is actually from 2006, a client I worked with back in 2006, but I pulled this dusted this off out of my archives because I do think that the visual display that they chose was very effective. This was back when they were having a lot of complaints about how long it was taking to get engineering change notices through the engineering department, and this drove some significant improvement to where they kept raising or lowering, depending on which metric you're looking at, their targets so that they got better and better and better and better. And 2 years after this engagement, when I talked with one of the engineers, he said it's just a very different world. They've never slipped back because they did the right thing by having a process owner in place and having very visible key performance indicators and someone that was measuring it and actively pursuing improvement constantly for that process. It's the only way it happens. All right, so now let's talk about sole ownership and what that means. So sole ownership is something that's going to challenge most of you, because the way companies are physically structured, the organization charts and all of that stuff, is directly in defiance of sole ownership for a process, or even more in defiance of sole ownership over a value stream. So here's what I mean by that. Let's just pretend like you own a store. If you own a store, believe me, you're going to be watching every single thing that happens in that store. Or you might be delegating it, but you're certainly going to, if you delegate it, be getting very regular reports back from the person about what's happening. If you've got too much inventory that's not selling, you're going to ship that inventory back. If you have products that are out of stock because people are starting to buy more of it, you're going to up your orders. You're going to be constantly adjusting based on the store. We don't do that in business. Well, I mean, in the corporate world especially, in the white-collar world, this behavior is shockingly absent. And so there's no way to ever perform at high levels if you don't have someone watching what's going on, minding the store, as I call it, and making real-time adjustments to get better and better and better and better and better. And who is that someone? Well, I would say, and I may offend many of you on the line, it should not be a lean champion that's a continuous improvement professional. It should not be a Six Sigma black belt, master black belt, green belt, yellow belt, purple belt, pink polka dot belt, whatever. It should not be an improvement professional. The people who should be minding the store are the people who are managing the store. And those are the people from, a lead all the way up through managers that are directly, in line of the work and entrenched in the work. The reason why you don't want a third party like a belt or lean champion or whatever being the one minding the store is that you want to transfer ownership for that performance, the process performance and value stream performance, to the people doing the work. And if you keep taking the reins, then you'll never transfer that ownership, and then it'll be a constant reliance situation. I just spoke at the ASQ World Conference on Monday. I was the keynote after Dan Pink. And one of the things that I was saying is, our job as improvement professionals is to teach and to coach. That is basically our only job, is to help people learn to see what we see, to help people shift their behavior so that they can perform better, processes can perform better. So our jobs are really, as teachers and coaches, not people who are going in and, measuring things for the front lines and for supervisors and for managers. Should not be doing it. And I would love to entertain some questions during the Q&A around this if you'd like. In fact, just a quick note, I forgot to mention this in the beginning, I'm leaving a lot of time in this webinar for Q&A because I think that looking at what your specific concerns and needs are is going to be far more helpful for you than any content I could deliver, because this is so incredibly situational. But anyway, you have to have someone minding the store, and they are someone who's involved with the work itself. So here's the problem. When we look at a typical org chart, now fortunately there are more and more companies out there that are ditching their org chart. So W.L. Gore is one. I just got back, well, not just, a couple months ago, visited with Menlo Innovations. Rich Sheridan is the CEO, brilliant guy. Amazing way of managing a company. No org charts, no job titles. I mean, there's just really a movement afoot in the progressive organizations and with progressive leaders to, basically trash the org chart. Now, I'm a traditionalist, and I came up the corporate ranks where org charts were not only very, very much part of our reality, but they actually worked really well in the companies I worked in, because we had this inherent mindset that it's not about the functional departments. They may be resident on an org chart, but it's not really about what those functions do. What's really about is the value stream that goes horizontally across the organization. It cuts through all those functional departments and then delivers value to a customer. That's what we need to be really watching and managing. So one of the things that's a challenge about process ownership is that this means at a value stream level, you should be having a value stream manager over every single value stream. And so from an org chart perspective, that means, let's just say that these functions are sales, estimating, IT, and finance, let's just say, or legal, whatever. But this means that somebody would be managing the performance of this value stream who doesn't have direct authority over these functions. So this is where, the companies of the future are starting, and progressive leaders are starting to understand that you don't have to have that level of authority on an org chart. You have to have that level of authority in reality. So in reality, if a value stream manager is named and it's very, very clear, so those of you who read The Outstanding Organization, I'm all about clarity. So it has to be super clear what the role is of this value stream manager, and then all of these functional areas will, if it's done well, buy into that, and they will cooperate with the value stream manager, and they will understand that the value stream manager's job is to manage the performance of that value stream. Now, if it comes to the need to make improvement, that value stream manager isn't necessarily going in and telling, let's say that this is, this is sales. They're not going to tell sales what to do. They're going to engage with sales as well as other functions to help them improve whatever needs to be improved so that the value stream can improve as it needs to. So there's no telling going on. Authority is more of the influence leadership mode. And so many of you are in a place in your careers where you probably need to develop some new skill sets, frankly. Learning how to lead through influence versus power on an org chart is a whole different skill set. And it's a really important skill set to achieve because it actually translates into life as well. It's not just a business thing. So I would recommend that you take a really strong look at what are the value streams across your organization and just start talking with people like, what if? What if we assigned a value stream manager to oversee the value stream performance and lead through influence when it comes to improvement? These people have to have that as part of their responsibilities, that they are measuring and improving value streams. So that's at the value stream level. Same thinking goes across the process level part of this. So when you drill down into the micro details, and now we're looking at work from a task perspective, step 1, step 2, step 3, into the weeds, the nitty-gritty of what goes on to get work to flow through an organization, you need the same type of person at a process level. So, for example, a value stream manager is managing at a macro strategic level. A process owner, or whatever you want to call them, I mean, you can call them George if you want to, but whatever that person is, they need to be managing at a process level. But the same thing applies. Many, many processes aren't resident within just one functional department. There are a few. I mean, there's definitely, like I had a client recently where it was this whole kind of financial product and data entry and customer service. Everything was done within one department, and it was a very contained department. And the full value stream was in one department. That's pretty rare. I mean, when you look across an organization, and I'll give a couple of examples. So let's look at healthcare. If you look at patient flow through a system, you've got everything from the front end office with admissions, checking benefits and all of that stuff, scheduling. And then you look at clinical care. Even within clinical care, there are so many different functional areas. There's the lab, there's x-ray, there's the physician, there's nursing, there's ancillary services, PT, OT, all these different therapeutic functions that get involved. And then at the back end, if it's inpatient, for example, then you've got the whole discharge process, and then it extends into finance so that people can get paid for that patient stay. So it's very broad across many, many functions. Same with if you look at any kind of construction organization. You'll see all kinds of different functions involved, from the front level sales, and then estimating, and then engineering. Sometimes engineering does estimating, and then there's the actual doing, whatever the drawing and all that, whatever the output is, and then there's the back end. So at a value stream level, that's what I mean. At a process level, estimating itself, just estimating, likely crosses many different functions in order to get a good estimate out the door. So that's why you have to have process owners at a process level as well. Same rule applies to the value stream managers. The process owner doesn't have to have on an org chart the authority over all of these functional areas. They have to have authority in reality over improving the process and leading improvement of the process. They don't even have to be the one actually facilitating the improvement. They just have to be driving the improvement effort and seeing the need and getting people rallied around the need for improvement. So this requires a fairly mature leadership team. But if you don't start talking about it now in your organization, you will never have any chance of driving this kind of behavior into the DNA of the company. So start as soon as we're done with this webinar. Schedule a meeting to go talk with someone, and we've got to get going on this. All right, so whether it's a process owner or a value stream manager, I'd like to suggest that you think about their role being somewhat like a doctor. So my doctor does not come into my home to make sure that I'm eating my vegetables and I'm staying away from some high fatty substances and stuff like that. My doctor, though, is ordering blood tests that looks at my my values every year or two to see if I'm on track. So that's the difference. A process owner is managing and watching, but if my doctor got some bad results with, knock on wood, thankfully he hasn't gotten, if he did, I'd be getting a phone call saying, hey, you need to improve. And so that's the same kind of role I would like to suggest the process owner and or value stream manager play, is that they're the ones looking from afar and making sure that your values are indicating health and not disease. That also means that that person has to have a very vested interest and ability in their, space in their work responsibilities to drive true continuous improvement, where you don't just stop when one fire goes out and move on to the next fire, where that person's responsibility, part of their job task, is in fact to keep measuring and keep improving. So it may require a little modification to job descriptions, but somehow whatever your process is in your company, that's what has to happen. All right, so now I'd like to just suggest a few rules that I find helpful in figuring out who serves as the process owner And I'm not talking about value stream managers right now. Right now I'm talking about process owners at a tactical micro level. So I would recommend you consider a manager or below so that they're closer to the work. A manager in a very large organization is typically at a higher level than a manager in a very small organization, but not always. Sometimes it's the opposite. So just make sure you look at the right level within the organization for the person to be close enough to the work and not kind of mired in vision and strategy and all that. This person could actually be a frontline worker. I challenge companies all the time and say, hey, it doesn't matter what their title is. It matters what their authority is viewed to be based on someone saying, hey, Joe's now a process owner. Joe wants it. We need it. Joe's it. Everyone needs to, recognize Joe as the process owner. As long as people recognize him or her as a process owner, then you should have no problems if your org chart doesn't have that role on it, exactly like that. I already mentioned this. It should not be a third party. It should be someone who's, involved in doing the work or managing the work. And I'd like to suggest that they are responsible for overall process performance, not just part of it. So what that means is they're looking constantly at performance against whatever targets have been set up. They're taking action, leading corrective action when negative trends appear. So again, they're not the ones going in and analyzing and saying, here's what needs to happen. That is unfortunately what I see happening a lot out there, where you've got full-time continuous improvement staff. I see them being the ones going in and doing the analysis, and basically, one of my CEO friends calls it dump and run. They dump data into the people who are overseeing the work. They dump data into their laps and say, here, you got a problem, fix it. That's not the role of a process owner. So, excuse me, the process owner is leading that action because they have been measuring it and they see the results themselves. Then the other thing is it, to me, corrective actions around responding to a problem, addressing a problem. Continuous improvement is slightly different in that that's when you're already performing well and you want to get better. So, I'm a basketball player and I've already got X% hit rate for free throws, but I want to get it higher. I'm already really good, but I want to get better. Same with dance, same with piano playing, same with art, same with acting, same with fitness. I'm running X number of, how many minutes per mile, but I want to get better. I want to lower that. So those kinds of things are part of the person's responsibility. And then it's so important, as I've already mentioned, that they're granted the authority and recognized to possess the authority to cross those organizational chart boundaries. That it's critical that people understand that and accept it for that person to be successful. So here is an example of something that you might want to consider that may be helpful for your organization to start wrapping its mind around what this process ownership thing looks like. And this, by the way, is only one client, one situation. I don't apply this across the board in all clients. I'll explain a little bit more in detail what I do in just a minute. Let's take a look at this, though. So we've got different, let's just say this is healthcare. We've got different value streams, and this is only 3 of them. So outpatient imaging, for example, if someone needs, MRI, CAT scan, X-ray, mammogram, all that stuff, outpatient imaging. Inpatient surgery, someone's going to go in and they're going to be in for a few days. Revenue cycle management is a business value stream, part of a hospital, for example. So let's just say that we have those 3 value streams and we've got a designated value stream manager for each 3 of them. Good. We're on our way. Now, perhaps at a micro level, it's too much for this person at this high of a level in the organization. So these people might be director level, they may be getting up there a little bit. Then we might want to break each value stream into some chunks and have a person at a little lower level be responsible for just that chunk. But again, this doesn't mean that for scheduling and registration, Bill operates in a vacuum. And even if there's a need for improvement, he wouldn't put together a team of people that are just in scheduling and registration. All of these folks would be very indoctrinated into holistic thinking and cross-functional improvement, and they would know and they would behave in a way that shows that they know that they would be engaging many different functions in the value stream in order to make a tiny little improvement in the scheduling and registration area, so that we stop making improvement in a vacuum. So this is an example of how you could have, two different levels of people overseeing value streams and processes and monitoring them. You don't have to have this all the time. If, let's just say that your organization could buy into process ownership, but no one's buying this value stream manager stuff, what you could do is you could have 3 distinct process owners that have a piece, 3 pieces of the value stream, and have them informally working very closely together to serve collectively as the value stream manager. It's not ideal, but it beats not doing anything. And so, this would be one of those things where you have to just look at how ready is your organization and be very strategic on what you can sell. Because, if your leadership team is not ready to take this on yet, you don't necessarily have to just say, okay, well, then I guess we can't improve and we can't manage our processes. You could come up with an alternative way that would, be a little more palatable to your leadership team until you get them more ready to accept what I call the full enchilada. If you look at really mature lean organizations, and this is mainly manufacturing, there are value stream managers for almost all the value streams in a mature lean organization. We haven't seen it as much outside of manufacturing, but it's coming. There's some value stream managers in healthcare that are real value stream managers. And one thing I will mention too, and this is for those of you who've been at this for a while, in manufacturing, I've seen, I don't know, maybe 40%, 30% of the time, the value stream manager actually has profit and loss responsibility for the full value stream. And in my opinion, that's the way to go. It may not be where you start, but that's the way to go, because then they have not only the responsibility, but they have the authority to make any changes they need in order to drive the financials in a positive way. And so that's just something to think about. You wouldn't see that at a process level, but at a value stream manager level, sometimes they do, in fact, the companies break apart the business so that they have P&L responsibility for that part of their business. All right, so there you go. There you have it. that is what outstanding organizations are doing quite successfully, and it's just a few points for you to start thinking about that you'll need to adapt to your environment in order to get processes actually working, and to stop having fires all the time and start having more meaningful workplaces where people can do more meaningful work and not be just constantly dealing with the angst that comes around with problems. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So I'd love to open it up to questions now. Just a quick aside, since this is the first webinar, since I'm about ready to turn my book in, I'm going to be doing monthly webinars again, but I just went back and looked at all the webinars from last year, and I'm not really quite sure which webinars I should do starting in June, July, and so forth. So could you please do me a favor and drop me an email and let me know what topics you're interested in, because we've got a lot of new people who've never been on the webinars, and then I see a lot of people who've been on pretty much every webinar I've ever done, and I don't want to just repeat stuff, for those of you who've been around for a while. I'm really curious to get your feedback, so please drop me a line about that. And then also for those of you who don't subscribe to my blog or newsletter, that's where I will be announcing the webinars and when registration's available, and so that's a good way to keep up with what's coming up. So at this point, I'll go ahead and open it up for questions. I would love to have some pretty detailed conversations, and please remember that I also can unmute you and we can talk, voice to voice instead of just typing in the questions and me repeating them and answering them. So And I also see someone has their hand up that I'm not sure if it's been up since the beginning and I forgot to put it down or not. So I'm going to put all hands down. So if you'd like to ask a question verbally, if you go ahead and put your hand up, then I can unmute you and we can take the questions from there. Any questions? Maybe we don't even have any questions. Well, I'll wait for just another minute. I'm going to actually go back up through the slides for a second, and I'm just going to quickly go through. Let me go. I won't do the. There we go. I'm just going to go through quickly and just see if you have any questions. Just refreshing your memory on what all we talked about. See if you have any questions based on any of these slides. Talked about different ways to document processes. And then we talked about what kinds of KPIs every single process needs to have and how they need to be visually displayed. And then we talked about what a process owner is versus a value stream manager, so that you've got one person focused on management. They're managing the work, and how we have to just challenge the conventional org chart in order to get this to happen at a process level and a value stream level. And what the process owner is similar to a doctor, and some criteria for what the process owner's role should be. And then finally, a way to have both value stream managers and process owners in an organization, how that might work together. So those are the top 3 for process management. I see no questions coming in. Oh, I see a hand coming up. All right, Joanne, I'm going to unmute you and you can ask your question. Hi, Joanne.
Great. Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Great. This is a great seminar. My question is, if you can review, you talked about organizations and hierarchies, and you also discussed how new progressive organizations are getting away from that. And I wanted to have you review that in a little bit more depth so I could understand it, because I'm still working on processing that and how that would actually work.
Yeah, it's actually pretty bizarre for those of us who grew up with org charts. And by the way, I'm a huge fan of org charts. I talk about them in my book. So I'll talk a little bit about what I've learned about W.L. Gore, because I studied them to put the outstanding organization together. What they do is you basically, as an employee, go in and you learn a little bit about the organization, and then you either are asked to be on a project or you lobby for a project, and you don't have a boss. So what happens when it comes to reviews, performance reviews, you're reviewed by your peers, and basically your peers are deciding whether or not you're performing at the level that they want you to, and they have very candid but very supportive conversations about what they need and how a person's performing on a team. Now, they do have some departments where it's a little more structured, because it's, for example, customer service is a little more structured, but the rest of the company is, pretty flat, and there really aren't bosses per se. And that's the model that anybody who's not structured seems to be following, a very similar model. And by the way,
interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And performance reviews, by the way, are done all throughout the year. They're not done once a year, so that people are getting very real-time feedback, which of course is very helpful when you want to make an improvement.
Right. No, it almost reminds me of Survivor in a way. It's like,
yeah,
you're not doing it. Oh, you're voted off the island, or you are, and you're going to make the improvements.
Yeah, personally, if I were developing a big business, I have a small business, but if I was just going gangbusters and hiring hundreds of people, I would probably still use an org chart. But what I would be doing is having the performance review model be far different from the annual performance review thing, and then I would have a lot of dotted lines. So one thing that you might consider, let me go back to the, hang on one second, let me go back to the, there we go. So what you can do if you've got a very traditional org structure and you want to just kind of tiptoe into this is you can have value stream managers or process owners, either one, and then have them have kind of direct line responsibility and have people actually reporting to them. and then have each function that's reporting up through them have a dotted line to functional heads, so that you get consistency across the organization, and you don't have, 3 people in finance, or well, actually finance is usually centralized. Let's say engineering. You wouldn't want 3 engineers operating 3 completely different ways. So you can have dotted lines, for the functional people, and then a solid line for the value stream manager. I've also
Right.
seen companies do it in reverse, where they've got dotted lines through the value stream to the value stream manager and solid lines to the function. I don't think that works as well, but it may be a way to tiptoe into it.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm going to unmute you again.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Joanne. Anybody else have a question? Okay, Mark has a question. How would break out visual performance charts to monitor, for example, HCAP surveys with 27 measurements? Well, yeah. So one of the things that Mark's alluding to here, and he's being kind in his question, is that in the healthcare industry, there are all these mandated measurements, and what's unfortunate is that hospitals are typically not hiring the number of staff they would really need to not only comply with the mandated measurement, but also do whatever measurement was relevant for their organization. I was just talking with the CEO healthcare client about this a couple days ago, and he said that they're so frustrated because 27 measurements is ridiculous, and it is. And where the accreditation bodies are coming from with this mandated measurement, it's just ridiculous. And frankly, no hospital I know is doing a good job at really looking at their own measurements and their own performance, because all of their resources are sucked into this mandated measurement world. And so maybe what you do in that case is pick, of the 27 measurements, you pick the top 3 to 4 or 5 that are most meaningful to that hospital or that organization, and then just have those be visually displayed. Yeah, we could talk forever about this. Mark, you're probably laughing. That's the only thing I can think of, is just taking some that are more relevant and and having those be the visual ones. You don't want to do all 27. It'll be too confusing. So I hope that helps. All right, anybody else have anything? Okay, Joanne, I'm going to put your hand on. I think I forgot to do that. And if you have a follow-up question, then you can put it back up. Okay, so could you do me a favor, everyone? And if you're typing a question, could you raise your hand just so I know to wait? Because otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar early if we've got no more questions. So no one's typing? All right. Well, then I'm going to take that as a sign that we have an extra 15 minutes to ourselves. Isn't that good? How often does that happen, that the meeting ends early? So thank you very much. Please, please, please email me with some content ideas that you'd like to hear about. I'd love to be able to start getting some new content out there, and I've got some ideas, but I'd really like to hear from you and see if my ideas match up with your ideas. I appreciate your time, and just please let me know if you have any problems with getting, whoops, I'm sorry, I lost my PowerPoint here. Whoops, come on, where's PowerPoint? Well, I guess it doesn't really matter since we're done, but I would love to be able to help you, if you have organizational resistance to any of these things. I would love to be able to help you, get your organization to understand what's really needed. Okay, this is what I was trying to do. What's really needed in order to reduce the chaos and become truly outstanding. So feel free to give me, drop a line, give me an email, call me, whatever, and I will look forward to seeing you hopefully next month at the webinar when we get it planned. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.